Tom Stoppard is one of the greatest living playwrights of the English language. A lot of people say that. He first made his mark in 1967 with the classic farce, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead. A three-time Tony Award winner, his works include Travesties, Jumpers, Arcadia, and The Invention of Love. In 1998, he picked up his first Academy Award for co-writing the screenplay for Shakespeare in Love. This month, the much-lauded revival of his 1982 play, The Real Thing, comes to Broadway from London. It first opened in New York in 1984 when it earned 5 Tony Awards with director Mike Nichols. I am pleased to have Tom Stoppard back at this table to talk about theater and The Real Thing and a lot of other things, The Invention of Love, which has been in San Francisco and in Philadelphia, and we fervently hope is coming to Broadway. Welcome back.
Thank you. Nice to be back.
What's the Real Thing? Is it different to see it today with this cast, which was the same cast you had in London, same director you had in London, where it went? It was. Is it different for you?
It's from 1982.
Yeah, 82, 84.
It's different in the right way, but the relief is that it doesn't feel like a period piece.
That's my point.
Yeah, no. We decided we didn't want to update it. You can't somehow do it, you know, as the year 2000. There's all references which throw you. At the same time, it's not old enough to be a period piece, so we're not making a big deal out of, oh, look what kind of trousers they had in 1982. Right, exactly. None of that goes on. Fortunately, the main character loves pop music even older than the play. So there's a lot of music in the play which we didn't have to change.
Yeah.
Well, we did have to change one, actually, because the New York production ages ago, and indeed London, made use of the Righteous Brothers. You've lost that loving feeling. And to my consternation, I mean, I was, you know, the artist aghast. We weren't allowed to do it. I don't know what they're saving it for. Maybe a commercial for something important like a motor car. But we're very happy.
Right? They weren't. You just couldn't get the rights to use it.
No, and now you saw it one night, didn't you? You may remember we had the Walker Brothers instead of the Righteous Brothers. But it makes no difference to the dialogue because it's still brothers and it's the same number of syllables. So I'm reasonably content. Yeah. I've got quite fond of the Walker Brothers now.
Is there anything about what you have learned about living and about and because of the experience you've had writing that you would want to change something about The Real Thing now?
Well, I had the chance. And the thing is that I always do change plays in small ways when I find myself in a rehearsal with them. I don't change them in the abstract. But if I'm working on a show, which is the revival of a play, I never consider the text to be set in marble. Or exactly. There's very, very little I wanted to do to The Real Thing. I can think of one sort of practical detail which just threw you about quite which year we were in. No, the great relief was that it turned out, as one hoped, that the true subject matter, which is love and fidelity and marriage and friendship and betrayal, all these things, they surf the years, don't they? And the language hasn't changed.
For a long, long time.
I think it's older than anything in the Smithsonian.
Exactly. I think it's older than anything you've done or anyone that we know. I mean, if that's not the classic subject matter, I don't know what is. Because, I mean, even The Invention of Love is part of the same thing. So you're still in search of some understanding of love, aren't you?
Well, maybe. What I'm aware of is that if I can think of an idea for a play, I go yippee and don't worry too much about what I'm in search of. You know, it's a narrative art form. What it's doing above and below the narrative is important and necessary and so forth, but it's not the main drive. I think that it's a storytelling art form, and having a story to tell is really the only thing which gets me going.
All right, there's so much I want to talk to you about, because as always, and even though we've had all these sessions together, there are constantly new ideas that I want to explore. Just tell me what The Real Thing is about.
It's certainly about love. It's partly about writing, because, as you know, the protagonist is a playwright, something I tried to avoid but failed to avoid. And fair enough, he does speak for me in quite a few respects about his feeling about words and language.
So it is your attitude that he's expressing.
It's my attitude, and using ideology in the broadest sense, it's probably still my ideology. But it's about the people who are in the play as far as the author's concerned. I mean, you have to make it about what's on stage at that moment. I think if you get beguiled into trying to write about subjects which have a capital letter, then I think that you might go wrong. I mean, I always start with a subject with a capital letter, but I'm incapable of writing a word until I can figure out some kind of story to tell, because I think that's what a theatre audience is there for. It's there to be told.
In other words, you've got to have in your head characters who are doing something, who are involved in something, who are grappling with something.
Yes.
Before you can dazzle us with language.
Oh, well, thanks. I mean,
come on.
Yeah, all right. Before I can dazzle you with language, I have to know who's up there and what they're up there for and what they're doing.
Before you can put words in there.
Yeah. I think there's a equation in the middle of it, you know. I think that if there is sufficient incident in the narrative, then the language plays a less important function. You don't have to, as it were, ride on, oh, look how I can use language. There are other plays where there is a dangerous suspicion of, look at me using language. And as I get older, I get less interested in that. And
less interested in what?
In showing off. I get more interested in trying to get as many corners and kinks into a story as I possibly can, rather than just let it impress you with some poetical feeling.
Here is my question about this, because Mario Cuomo, governor of New York, was considered one of the great orators of recent political life.
Yes.
He will question when I make this point, but I believe it, so if it's right or wrong doesn't matter, it makes the point. He doesn't like you to consider him a great orator, because he thinks it suggests that he's only about making speeches. Is there an element of the same thing with you, because there's this constant talk about your virtuosity with words, that somehow it detracts from something that's more important to you?
I think he's onto something. I mean, a couple of thousand years ago, rhetoric was a course, you know. You can take rhetoric, deal with, as it were, oration, making arguments. And as with any other skill or talent, that can become an end in itself. You know, you can win a rhetoric competition and actually not say anything very important. I think that if I were Cuomo, I'd feel the same way.
Okay, but how about Stoppard?
No, I'm saying that. I think that, you know, I resist the notion, though there may be some truth in it, that my pleasure in rhetoric perhaps has too great an emphasis in this equation as between, you know, what is being said and how it's being said.
So we lose sight of the substance of what is being said. We say it so well, we lose sight of the value of what is being said.
But of course, ideally, the way you say it is supposed to help you understand, help you to listen to what is being said. So they're supposed to work together, not against each other.
All right, let me come to this play.
Yes.
So when Henry is in an argument with his wife.
Yes.
And, I mean, this is classic stuff. He's in an argument with his wife, and basically she has brought to him a play written by a political activist who clearly has passion about politics and has tried to express it, and it's not expressed very well. Henry, the playwright in the play, has to demonstrate to her that words are important, and that words, and he picks out a cricket. Pick it up. What's that about?
Well, he picks up a cricket bat, which is what we have instead of baseball bats. In the movie, it'll be a baseball bat, but we won't go into that.
Well, if it's going to be made a movie, that makes me happy.
He says, look, this bat it looks like a lump of wood. In fact, it's several pieces of different kinds of wood cunningly put together so the whole thing is sprung like a dance floor. And it's for hitting cricket balls with, and it's so constructed you can give a cricket ball a little knock. It'll travel a long way very fast because that's what it does. And he's rather unkindly comparing what he thinks he does as a writer with what this person has done. And he says, this, if you hit the ball with it, the ball will travel 10 feet and you will dance about shouting, ouch, with your hands stuck into your armpits. Fair enough. I mean, there's something in that. But again, you know, I'm not entirely at ease with Henry at this moment because...
At this moment in the play or this
yes,
moment in your life?
At that moment in the play.
Yeah.
He speaks for me largely, but he's probably aware, I'm certainly aware, that that's not the only kind of writing. That there's a kind of writing which actually I envy, which in a way it's not different to speak deeply about it. It's not actually that it's clunky and just cudgel-shaped, but its qualities are much, much more subtle, economical, much more hidden. And there's a lot of flashy stuff in the real thing, which I'm pleased about because I like the play and that's what it is. But I'm not sure that it's the way I'd like to be writing now, 20 years later.
You'd be less flashy?
I think so. Flashy is a word which needs definition, perhaps, but I do admire plays which completely absorb you and involve you in the interaction between characters and what's happening to them, without there being a, let's say, flashy, you know, rhetorical, witty with a capital W, all that stuff, without these characters being in the service of that kind of writer. It's not necessary, and there are many, many wonderful plays which personally I admire, which I don't know how to write. I look at them and think, God, I'd like to write one of those. How do you do it?
Which reminds me, I mean, there's so many ways to go here, which reminds me of you once somewhere talking about retirement. And you said, you know, I may, correct me if I'm wrong, stop writing for the public and see if I can write a poem. And in a sense, spending 2 years trying to write poetry, even if I fail honorably,
yes,
by working honorably,
yes,
that would be an exquisite retirement.
Yes.
Not knowing whether you can write poetry or not, or not knowing whether you can write it at the level that would be acceptable to you.
That's come out pretty accurately, actually, from your memory. It's not quite the emphasis I'd give it. What I really would like to do is to keep writing without owing anybody anything. And if I felt like spending a year on 14 lines of poetry, I'd be perfectly happy. In a way, it's no different. The effort would be the same because 14 lines of poetry are that much more difficult if you're trying to write like the people you most admire. I find, and I probably said at the time to you, that collusion of sound and sense in poetry is a far greater achievement than writing prose dialogue, prose fiction, in my view.
So the ultimate writing is poetry?
I think it is. I think that looking back on several hundred years, the miracles are still works like Shakespeare's sonnets. Can I just add to that what I'm trying to say? Great Expectations or Oliver Twist are masterpieces. You can't do one for yourself, but you know how it's done. You can see, you know, he's just a lot better, but you can see how he does it, what he's doing. There's no real mystery. With a great poem, I think there's much more mystery about how it's done. And you feel, you know, just to evoke what we all pay lip service to and I actually believe, you feel that there has been some contact with a divinity which you might call a muse, or you might call God, or you might call anything you like, but it's not simply perspiration, it's inspiration.
Does that mean some have it? I mean, can it be an acquired talent? Or
well, no, I don't think so. I think it requires enormous diligence and fidelity to a gift to draw that gift out. But whether you can put the gift there to be drawn out, that's a bigger question. I mean, if we're talking about that sense of being divinely inspired, I mean, you know, it's almost a truism, isn't it, to say that the great writers, they write almost unconsciously, by which I mean that, they probably know that you're at a table working. But the moment it comes and where it comes from is like an unconscious moment. And I think that's true of all artistic creation.
That's exactly what I was thinking. It's true clearly for composition of music.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes. You can know all the mathematics of music that you want to know,
yes,
but it's something else.
Yes, I absolutely think, I don't know how to compose music or paint a picture, but I firmly believe that they're all the same thing, differently expressed.
You're now at work, I think, on a play about Russia.
I'm only laughing because the last time we met,
we talked about
you caught me at a moment which I now have every cause to regret. You caught me at a moment where I was impatient with that kind of precious, coy thing that writers, I can't possibly speak about my next work.
I hate it. I am more impatient than you are ever.
I was telling you, and I was telling everybody, I was telling people who didn't wish to know. And that was a couple of years ago, and I'm still writing it. It's really embarrassing.
It is essentially, but though it is about poetry in Russia, and
it's about politics, really.
Politics, and what kind of, and whether oppression.
Yes, it's about that.
Stimulates poetry, or
it's not particularly poetry,
or smothers it.
Yeah, it took off. This is my uncoy hat on now. Right. I mean, it took off from the desire to explore the notion that it's really in a society where the artist is repressed, suppressed, that the artist has any importance at all. And, I was thinking, really, think about literary critics or columnists. We have this Tower of Babel, scores, hundreds of people with their soapboxes. It's very hard to matter. And I'm writing about a period where you were sent to exile, imprisoned, in a sense, executed slowly, if you got out of line with the state. Tsarist Russia we're talking about. I'm talking about the beginnings of the movement, which 60 years later, got you to Lenin.
Late 1800s, early 1900s.
I'm actually going from sort of 1840 to 1870.
Right.
Yeah.
Here, I just want to talk about this for a moment, too, because, I mean, the Invention of Love is about a houseman.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And his relationships and his need for love and all those things.
Yes.
Correct?
Yes.
So in trying to put that play together, you had to study Latin, you had to study houseman's life, and you spent, a couple of years research, huh? Maybe?
3 or 4.
Yeah. 3 or 4?
Yeah.
Just doing what? Just reading?
Yeah, reading, writing stuff down, doing other things in between.
Yeah.
But I only stopped because I had a deadline. I was having a good time. I don't want to give the impression that I was dutifully going to the library. I was having a great time. He was a poet and a Latin scholar, and the Latin scholarship was more important to him, I think, than the poetry. Well, undoubtedly it was. That was his monument as far as he was concerned. He was a real person. His book was called The Shropshire Lad, the best-known book of poems. That was something that he did when he was unhappy over a few months. But he wished to be remembered as a scholar. And I find that these two sides of a man's character are very interesting, and they play upon each other, the romantic and the classical. So that's what turned me on to that.
Which turned you on to want to do that, this idea of the conflict or the...
I thought, when I found out that this well-known poet was actually the greatest Latin scholar of his time, at that instant I wanted to write a play about him, and not until then.
You know, why?
Because of the interaction between these two sides of his nature.
Okay, but my question is deeper than that. I mean, it goes beyond that. Why you? Why was it, what made it that interesting to you?
Well, I probably have to lie on a couch for 50 minutes and pay for it if I really understood. You know, the last play, I think, which I had here was Arcadia. And if I were you, I'd probably think, well, that's the same thing, actually, romantic and classical. So it's a hang-up, is it? It's
Maybe.
It's a serious artistic interest, stroke hang-up. But as I said to you earlier, all I think is, yippee, that's something I want to do.
Yippee, this is something I want to do.
Yeah, because every time I finish a play, I have nothing. I never have anything.
In The Real Thing, this production, or even in the original production, this is a story of infidelity. This is a story of a playwright who, wonderful twist. He likes pop music and rather than opera, and yet he's an intellectual guy, and all these kinds of things that are interesting about this sort of comparisons and contradictions. And you're grappling with lots of things, including the idea of someone who writes about love and pain, all of a sudden experiencing love and pain.
Yes.
That's part of it, right?
Yes.
In the end, when a person who's committed infidelity, they both have to in their life, they come together at the end. Was that just to leave them there, or do you know, or do you have ideas about where they were going in their life, or do you care? In other words, when the last scene we see, in your mind, do you have a sense of what was going to happen to these characters?
If I thought about it, I'd probably hazard something, but it's much more a case of that's all, folks. I mean, I think, that's where it stops. It's, a play like a novel, whatever else they're artifacts. You try to make them very nicely, but that's what they are. I think one of the points about a good experience in the theatre is that the audience has severally its responses. It doesn't have a joint response to a question like yours. What happens after that?
Right.
But I did want it to end up the way it did.
Okay. I'm curious about whether, and I've got to get out of here, but I'm curious about whether, plays have some perfect arc so that I want it to go from here.
They do.
They
do. It never works out perfect, but there's a platonic arc which you try to find.
Or you say at some point, I'm loving this, but I got to close this down, folks, because you've only given me 3 hours to tell you my story.
I did a translation of a Chekhov play a couple of 3 or 4 years ago.
Was it Seagull?
Seagull. It was in San Diego.
Right.
Yeah, Jack O'Brien did it. And working on it, you really find out why people can't write plays by Chekhov if they're not Chekhov. I mean, enormous thing would, the whole kind of story would go like that, and it sort of happens in a page and a half, and you think, well, how did he do that? It doesn't feel possible. It just gets to the chase like that, and then there's another one there, and these are 4-act plays, but we do them in 2 halves, and each half, I mean, a Chekhov act should probably last 35. The last act of the Seagull probably should last about 17 minutes. They're incredibly efficient. It's a funny word to use about Chekhov, but they're unbelievably efficient. They just don't waste anything. They just don't waste words. They don't go off where they shouldn't go. There's an incredible control over the material, which you don't really, at least I never really understood until I was forced to analyze what was happening here because I was doing an English version of The Seagull. That is really fascinating. I'd like to do one of those.
It's great to have you here, as it always. The Real Thing by Tom Stoppard opens. It's a revival, as we said, whatever that means. It's at the Ethel Barrymore Theater. It's always a pleasure. to have you. Thank you very much. We'll be right back. Stay with us.